This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Allison Jayne Ewing, author and therapist. And I want to thank you for joining the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You might see that icon up there. It says listen on Newsly. If you use coupon code GHOST, you can try that out for 1 month free. So we will be on Newsly as an audio-only version of the podcast later tonight. So I want people to check that out. You can use coupon code GHOST. We also have inspiredlifetapping.com as a URL for your website, and that will be fully clickable on every platform that we can be listened to or watched when it's fully published, and people will be able to do that. So I want to let people know that. And then this episode, we're going to talk about how EFT tapping can clear the subconscious blocks that keep you stuck. So that's like kind of an overall theme, but we're going to talk about a lot of things. And one of the first things we always ask our guest is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, what motivates me is knowing that I have this amazing mind-body tool that can really transform lives. I've seen it happen to so many of my clients, but I've also experienced it for myself. And it's really exciting because it's so much faster and easier than some of the traditional methods, like traditional talk therapy. Can take a long time to create change, whereas EFT tapping, change can happen so fast. It's remarkable. It actually shocks me on a daily basis how quickly my clients change or how quickly I can shift things in my own life.
Maybe you can tell people, maybe not everybody in our audience understands what EFT tapping is. So you can give people like a basic understanding of that and talk about like what that means
Yeah.
from a process standpoint, and then, maybe how you actually implement it.
Yep. Sure. I'm happy to. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique in this case. And we sometimes just call it tapping, or you might have heard of it as tapping, because you are literally taking your own hands and tapping on different points in your body, on your body. So there are 9 acupressure points that we use in the Emotional Freedom Technique. And these points are from Chinese medicine. And what it does is you're basically combining acupressure stimulation with some more traditional psychotherapy techniques of processing verbally the emotional material, the things that are keeping you stuck, the things that are bothering you. But what happens is that when you pair the tapping of these points, these particular points, with talking about these things that you're very emotional about, it actually sends a calming signal to the amygdala, to the fight or flight part of your brain, and it shuts it off. And our nervous system kind of runs on sort of an on-off switch. We're either in our stress mode, what's called our sympathetic nervous system, or we're off in our relaxation mode called our parasympathetic nervous system. And when you tap on these particular points, you put yourself into this parasympathetic state. So you can't actually hold an intense feeling when you're in that relaxed state. So I say it's kind of like pouring water on the fire of a strong emotion. It just sort of puts it out, and it actually creates a new neural pathway. So the thing you were just talking about or thinking about while you tapped, it no longer bothers you at an emotional level anymore.
That's really interesting because it seems like it's related to acupuncture and Eastern style medicine, which a lot of times people in the West are so used to, chemical and surgical like active things that are not thought of in terms of like the old techniques that are maybe thousands of years old that aren't as invasive, so they actually are more connected to your like holistic body without having to have adverse side effects.
Right,
um,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's been interesting because of that, and because we're such a Western medicine culture, it has been a little bit hard to, convince some people initially about EFT. I mean, I have been trained in the emotional freedom technique since 2014. And back then, no one had ever heard of it. And people thought I was nuts when I said, you got to
Yeah.
tap on your face and it'll be amazing. But it's really come a long way since then. And there's been tons of scientific studies done on this where they've taken people's blood and saliva pre and post tapping sessions. They've had people on EEGs measuring their brain waves. And we know for a fact at this point that it puts you into an alpha brainwave state very quickly. And alpha is the state maybe some of your listeners have gotten into when they've meditated or if they're yogis during Shavasana, but most of us only go into alpha before we fall asleep at night. So it's that
Yeah.
kind of woozy feeling state that you have. That's alpha. Simply by stimulating these particular points for a couple minutes, you will move into alpha. We have shown that, definitively on EEGs. The other really interesting thing with the blood and saliva studies is people have been tested and found to have dramatic reductions in their stress hormone cortisol production, an average of 24%, but up to 50% in particular individuals. And cortisol is our stress hormone that is responsible for belly fat. That's what's kind of been in the news a lot for that. So, you're tapping on yourself and you're just helping your body overall to reduce its production of stress hormone, which is really good for you and it's good for your health. There's been more recent studies that have looked at it has increased immunoglobulin production. So your immune system goes up when you do this tapping. It has actually been demonstrated to start to regulate genes differently. So turning sort of on your good genes and off your bad genes for a simplistic explanation. So the studies on this, it's literally mind-blowing what's coming out about how good of a technique this is for you.
It seems like it's very powerful, and a lot of times, like these more, naturopathic or holistic or Eastern medicine versus Western medicine techniques, and people are so into these like magic bullets
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the Western medicine, which are like the pharmaceuticals or the surgical procedures, and there's kind of a doubt because they want that instant thing, and then if you have to go through a process, and it's kind of like I'm a Buddhist, so I meditate and I chant, and we kind of put ourselves into this kind of less of a fight or flight type of thing, and the wolf's not at the door if you learn how to change your mindset. If you
Yeah.
start to practice like mindfulness, which is kind of
Mhm.
like a high level version of what you're talking about, but you're going into detailed physiology of like what you can do to put yourself there without just chanting, that you can do something actually to trigger it beyond that. And
Right.
I think a lot of people just, are so used to the magic bullet that
Yeah.
they have a resistance to something that seems so simple. Or maybe it's not so simple because then it takes some level of rigor or you have to accept it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's pretty interesting because I was initially trained in mindfulness and dialectical behavior therapy years ago, and I found it to be great. I think that there's a lot of stored traumatic memories and subconscious programs that don't really serve us, that got programmed into us at an early age, that got programmed into us in a way that we don't have verbal access to it. So being able to talk it out in talk therapy when it's something that's not verbally encoded in our brains, we can't access that. And so
Mhm.
these mind body techniques I think are just wonderful. And I'm so glad our my field of psychology has started really moving towards using them more because it really can release these things that are stuck in the body at a body level. The thing with EFT tapping, though, that I really love is I actually think it's a lot easier to access for the average person. So meditation can feel hard to most people, especially when you first start. You get the monkey mind or the squirreliness in your body, and a lot of people have a very hard time with that. Whereas tapping can get you very similar results biochemically, but by doing something active, by tapping on these 9 points on your body. So I feel like a lot of people that kind of could feel a little easier than meditation. And I will say that having done tapping on myself these years, I am much more regulated now and much more sort of grounded and calm and centered. And now meditating is very much easier for me than it used to be before I had done the tapping.
Now, I wanted to ask, like, the maybe the interconnectedness between, like, the EFT tapping and your author work, as you have a book
Mhm.
that you have written about, find love again and learn how to date like a goddess. Is there an interconnection between what you've done with the tapping and the kind of losing that wolf at the door
Yeah.
kind of, thing? Maybe you can tell the story of like how that connects.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of jokingly say that it's a tapping book disguised as a dating book. Because every chapter I do have a tapping script. I explain how to do tapping in the book. And the reason that I created this book was because I went through a divorce myself in my 40s and not ever expecting to be dating again at midlife. I was pretty taken aback by the new world that I found myself in. I mean, the last time I had dated in my 20s, cell phones had just come out. So there was no texting. There was certainly no online dating really to be spoken of. And everything was really different. And when I started dating this time around, I realized that I had a lot of knowledge of sort of human psychology and neurobiology. And I had this amazing tool of tapping that could really help other single women out there to move out of maybe dread or negativity and fear about dating, especially I think dating again at midlife after maybe you've been in one relationship for 20 years. It can be very daunting to think about going out and dating. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to write this book and kind of almost like a love letter to my fellow single woman to kind of help them to navigate this world of dating. So and tapping is such an amazing tool because for example, if you're nervous before a date, you can do some tapping and it'll quiet that nervous system and it'll calm you it down. And then you show up feeling better, more confident. Or
Mhm.
if you have been ghosted by someone you were chatting with and you felt like excited about, and then they just disappear. I mean, ghosting is like the thing that happens these days, right? And it can
Yeah.
be so crushing emotionally to us. And logically, we might know, okay, we didn't even really know that person, but emotionally, we feel like abandoned and rejected and all these yucky things that a lot of times tie back to earlier days. And that's why they can be a big trigger. But when we have this tool of EFT tapping, we can get over those
Mhm.
hurt, rejected feelings much, much faster. And then you can tap around. And then I've had this happen with many clients where they tap around after someone had ghosted them. And then they think, why do I even care? I mean, if he ghosted me, then, but you have to get to the other side of that emotion before you can have that new thought.
Yeah, it's like hard to learn how to deal with your triggers. Like a lot of times, like being an artist, being a creative, we kind of take our triggers and turn it into art. So it's
Yeah.
like art therapy. So, but a lot of people, if they don't know how to access that, then they don't know how to speak the things you're talking about. So the tapping, but if you're coming from like the artistic kind of mindset, we kind of take the things that when the looking glass, you look at that, you look at yourself, you start doing this really deep self analysis that a lot of times people don't do. And it
Yeah.
will come out for your painting or your poetry or your singing or whatever. But I think what's cool is that you're giving a different path to people that maybe have a hard time speaking out what's inside, the kind of inner thing. And then, the inner self is like hard to access without, like you said, if you don't know how to speak it out, even if you're talking to a therapist, you're not communicating what those feelings are because you're not really accessing it.
Right, exactly. Most of us go into sort of a numb out or dissociative state when real tough emotions come. So we're not accessing them. And also, I mean, how many times have people, I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to this, have you had the experience where you are talking maybe with a therapist or with a friend on the phone and you realize you get some insight you realize, oh, the reason that I keep dating these unavailable men and trying to get them to love me is because my dad was kind of unavailable and I was always trying to get him to love me. So you recognize like, oh, this is a pattern, but then you keep doing it,
Yeah,
right?
that's the problem. Like, how do you keep on repeating the thing that draws Mr.
Right,
Wrong or Mr. Right or whatever,
right,
because you tend to not learn the lesson because it's
right.
like in your subconscious. It's only
That's
when if you're like an author, you start to drive into that. If you're the creative, you start to like try to figure out all those things and kind of face the demon, and
right.
that's what comes out. And you have to access the vulnerability. So
Yes,
somehow you're through the tapping, you're accessing that wall that people don't break. Then you're getting
exactly.
to it, and you're getting the bio reaction of it, and then the
Right,
spiritual and the soul and the self,
right,
the things that
right.
Nietzsche and all the philosophers get into. But
Right,
like not everybody gets into that. They're like, well, that's foo foo. So they can't access it. So they got a wall.
right.
So you're getting past that, right?
Yeah, this is exactly getting past the wall because you can know logically in your mind. I mean, we all know logically in our mind we shouldn't eat a sleeve of Oreos in one sitting, right? But we do it anyway, right? So
Yeah.
so that
Pat.
so the tapping kind of breaks that wall. The what is it subconsciously? That's the key word that you just said there. What is it subconsciously that is driving me to do this thing that I know I shouldn't be doing anymore? Tapping can help you access that and eliminate that. So it clears it out and then you won't do it anymore. And I've seen it so many times that I know now that this really works. It's super effective. And once you tap on whatever the root of the problem was and clear it out, it will go away and it will go away permanently. I've had clients now for over a decade that I've spoken with, and I know that the thing that they came to see me about has never come back. So 10 years is a pretty long time for something to have shifted, for something this deep to have shifted.
There's also one thing I wondered, like a lot of people look for what their soulmate, right? Because they
Mhm.
they think the soulmate's going to solve all their problems. But the problem, what I've learned after talking to lots of therapists, is like you have to solve your own problem before you can actually get into a relationship. So if you've got like that type of issue where you're, self sabotage,
Yeah,
well, if you don't solve that, you're going to just be drawn to people that can help continue that. And
right,
so until you get to the point where you're not gonna have imposter syndrome, or you understand you have imposter syndrome, and you understand why you get brought into these situations where you're kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy, you're going into the fail zone. Why are you going into that when you don't need to do that? Like, you
right.
have to find a different path to kind of retrain your brain to maybe go a different way.
Yeah.
Because I guess it becomes comfortable, right? To do
Mhm.
the same pattern.
Safe, it feels, yeah. Some
Even
of
if it's hurting you, right?
Exactly. Some of us were raised in chaos, so being outside of chaos feels very uncomfortable, and it feels uncomfortable. You think about when you feel uncomfortable emotionally, you feel uncomfortable in your body, right? So again, it makes sense that we need to heal from a body-based technique to change our sort of our minds and our emotion through the body. So that's actually the whole premise of my book actually is when you do the work on the inside, when you change your subconscious programming, your limited beliefs, the things that are keeping you stuck in these unhealthy patterns, that what you see on the outside will shift and change. And when
Mhm.
I say that, it might sound like magic or foo-foo or whatever. But there's actually a lot of science that explains why this happens, because we have, in psychology, something known as a confirmation bias, which is our brains will seek to find evidence to confirm what we already believe. So, for instance, a common belief that happens with the clients I work with is they believe there's no good men left out there, right? And I
Yeah,
know there
like,
are a lot
go
of
for the
men.
bad ones. So
Yeah,
you gotta go for the bad
right.
ones.
There's no good people left. There's nobody left, right? And so, but when you think about that statement, what is underneath that statement? Fear, right?
Mhm.
You're afraid that there's no good people left out there. So that fear keeps you stuck in more fear. So your confirmation bias will then go around and find evidence to support this. Oh, look at that person acting like a jerk. Look at that guy my friend
Mhm.
dated that just did this. So then it convinces you that your belief, this thing that was just a belief, it's not a fact. It's not a fact that there's no good people left out there for singles, right? There are plenty of good people out there looking to connect with someone, but your belief is so strong that then that's all you see. And what's really, really interesting is when you can reprogram your subconscious mind, when you can alleviate the anxiety, fear, worries that are upholding that limiting belief, suddenly you can have a new belief. So you can start to believe, okay, there's 8 billion people out there in this world. A lot of them are single. A lot of them are good people. Okay, you know what? Actually, there's probably plenty of good people out there that I could date. When you start to have that, then all of a sudden you start to see people acting better in your environment, somebody who was, at your Starbucks all the time that you maybe never noticed before. And the
Mhm.
reason that happens is because there is this part of our brain called the reticular activating system. And it is the part of your brain responsible for sort of siphoning out information and looking for and identifying patterns. Because we have way too much information thrown at us all day, every day. Our brains would completely go on overload if we didn't have our reticular activating system. And so, but what it does is it looks for things that it thinks are important to you. So the example I always love to give is if you're buying a new car, you decide, okay, I'm going to buy a Honda Accord. And then all of a sudden, everywhere you look, you see Honda Accords, right? I think most
Mm,
of us
yeah.
can relate to that. And you think to yourself, were they always there? Or am I just seeing them? Well, let me tell you, they were always there. They definitely were always there. You just weren't seeing them because your reticular activating system did not deem it important to pick up on Honda Accords. Now it does because you're thinking about buying one. So now your reticular activating system is going to show you Honda Accords, just like if now you believe, oh, there's lots of great available single people in my community, suddenly you'll start to see
Then you'll
and
see
notice.
them. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then also you might like what was maybe not interesting to you. Like maybe like the problem is the pattern is like you're going after this alpha male and it always fails. And they're not really, they don't have your interest. They don't have they don't have your beliefs. They're not even doing anything same hobbies or anything, right?
Right,
So if you start to do something, well, maybe if I go to this place that I love and I kind of open my eyes, I actually might see that there's, like you say, I'm going to see the Honda Accord. I'm going to see these other people that I'm
right,
not paying attention to. Like,
right.
you're
Yeah,
mountain biking, you find some other people that mountain bike, you hike, you go to a poetry slam, and then you find other poets, you find a poet that's interesting, you start talking,
right. Exactly.
instead of going to the bar or going to the thing that you always did and
Right,
it never works, but you keep
right.
on like, well, if that doesn't work, like, why you keep on doing it?
Right, exactly, that is the thing, but I also have this great story about someone who did the internal work and found someone right near her. So she had done for about 8 years, she lived in a high-rise building, and she kept dating guys that did not treat her well. And it was related to her past and some of her early childhood experiences. And she kept trying to seek love from someone who could not love her back. So she did a lot of work on herself. She did use EFT tapping, she used other techniques, and she eventually healed that pattern of needing to get the love and attention from someone who was never going to give it to her. She was able to clear it out at an emotional level so that she no longer craved that attention. And then one day she got in the elevator, and this guy is in the elevator who I've seen his picture. He's an objectively handsome person. And I say that because it's hard to believe she never noticed him before that day. But they start chatting and he asks her out. And They hit it off, and immediately she realizes, wow, this guy is really different than anyone I've ever dated before. He is kind and adoring and supportive and just a gentle soul. And so she starts dating him, and she's like, this is amazing. This is the best boyfriend I've ever had. And 3 or 4 months into the relationship, he says to her, I've been seeing you in that elevator for 8 years, and you never gave me the time of day before that day.
Well, yeah, she like she finally saw the accord, It's like it's like sometimes you don't, and then maybe you don't feel that they're approachable.
Right. Well, that's
Because
what he said. He
yeah,
felt
they
she
weren't.
wasn't approachable because
Yeah,
she was so closed off, and she was closed off because her reticular activating system was only looking for,
yeah.
these guys that reminded her of, someone who could never love her before. So, yeah, it unfortunately, one of the things our psyches tend to do is we want to solve a problem from the past by recreating the problem and hoping to
Mm,
master it. It is just sort of the human drive to try to master things in the past. And instead, if we can heal our need to master certain situations, then we won't want to do that anymore. So that's where the tapping comes in, where it's like pouring water on that fire. Because if we have this burning urge to get someone to love us who is emotionally unavailable, then we're going to keep seeking those partners, trying to get them to love us. And then when they don't, because they're not capable of it, then we get that confirmation bias that says, oh, see, I wasn't really lovable. I'm not really worthy. I guess this is the best I can do. And this is all that I deserve. And so our false narratives get reinforced because of the very nature of who it is we're trying to date. And one other thing on top of that I don't talk about as much, and I probably should, is that what can happen when we continually try to date people who are not a good match for us or don't serve us, is that there's almost this slot machine principle that comes into play. It's called intermittent reinforcement. And the intermittent reinforcer is the most powerful kind. And that is the kind that slot machines run on, right? So with a slot machine, you don't know when it's going to hit. With a paycheck, you know you're going to get paid once a week or every other week, right? It's steady. It's a reinforcer. It reinforces your behavior to come to work, but it's steady. It's predictable. With an intermittent reinforcer, you don't know when you're going to get that hit. And it is very, very enticing. It puts our brains on a high drive. It makes us really excited and enthused, and it can be addictive, as we know.
mhm.
So when you are dating someone who gives you breadcrumbs, who is hot and cold, who hits you up one day and says all this great stuff and then disappears for 3 days, and then they come back and then they disappear for a week, they are that slot machine. They are rewarding you here and there in an unpredictable way. So, guess what? It makes you feel excited. It makes you feel hooked in. It makes you feel addicted. And so, you can get really, really hooked on someone who is not emotionally available and never going to be a good, consistent partner for you. Whereas someone who just shows up, is consistent, calls you every day,
Yeah, yeah.
offers you consistent care and attention, that can feel boring. And so
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
lot of people who will then say, well, I'm not really attracted to them. But it's not that you're more attracted to the other person, it's that your biochemistry is more hooked on the rush of the up and down than on the steady state. So that becomes something to tap, because if you are a person who craves that up and down, that is something you can tap on and clear that craving, so that then all of a sudden the steady person actually does become attractive to you, and you feel juicy and excited about the steady state person.
That's interesting because like a law of attraction, is like I'm into like frequencies because I'm a musician.
I am
And what
too.
I find is like vibrations and frequencies. Like, well, if you're in a harmonious frequency, right, and you're a musician, and you play that harmonious frequency, everybody's waving, everybody's like in line, right? If you do something that's more distorted or raucous, you could be like punk and everybody's like slamming into each other, and it's like really. abrasive.
Yeah.
So you can have dissonance, you can have harmony, you can have noise. You can have these things. And so if you have an alignment of like a very harmonious frequency, you would think that you would attract other people with harmonious frequencies, you'd be in the same zone. So
Right.
you would be able to attract the people have like-minded things and that would kind of work together. But
Right.
sometimes, like you said, if you're kind of out of alignment, you're attracting this kind of polar opposite
Hmm. Yeah.
because they're interesting. And so, yeah, opposites do attract, but then is it actually sustainable? It's like
Right.
anything you do, can it be sustainable or is it kind of flash in the pan? It
Right.
doesn't really last.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And if someone isn't emotionally available, they're never going to be able to connect with you deeply in a deep intimacy kind of way. And I'm not talking about physical necessarily. I'm talking about emotional intimacy. And the number one thing why most people have left their previous relationship is because they were feeling lonely or disconnected or not intimate or not getting their needs met, their emotional needs met with their partner. So you certainly don't want to repeat that pattern. And I always warn my clients, make sure you're not dating the same person in a different body, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
they might
If
look different, but if they're acting
it's
the
the same
same,
it's the same thing, yeah. You're just
yeah,
going to the same flame, you're going after the same kind of fire, you're getting pulled into that trap,
exactly.
'cause it's like this, it's well, it's not easy, well, it could be easy because like, if you're into that pattern, it's like addiction. And people
Right.
get addicted to certain things,
Right.
and
It
you could
feels
be addicted
comfortable.
to that kind of Tinder, "Oh, I match, I match, I match." Well,
Right,
what you're putting out there is not really who you really want, but you maybe it's who you think you want,
right,
and then it doesn't work, so you're kinda out of alignment, so it still starts with, like, tapping and also, like, that if the tapping helps you look in that looking glass self and understand, well, what is it that you really want?
right,
Who are you, and who would actually fit with you, and what's your overall kind of life goal
right.
with your
Exact
partners? Like, what do you see? You think there's got to be some things that are in common, or you're just not. It's not going to work.
right, right. One of the chapters in my book is called How Cinderella can I swear on
Yeah, yeah.
this?
I saw that. I was going to ask you about
Yeah,
that.
How Cinderella Fucked Me Up. That's the name of the chapter, right?
Yeah.
And the whole chapter is about the fact that I feel like I was sort of brainwashed a little bit from society and whatnot as a kid to feel like in the dating world that I needed to be the chosen one, right? That
Mhm.
that that dating for a young woman was all about showing up and being pretty enough and cute enough and funny enough and accomplished and all the things to get someone to choose me. And I would be so focused on a date of will he choose me? Will he like me? Right? That's another way of putting it, like getting someone to like you rather than really kind of being in my own body, being comfortable in my own skin, and thinking to myself, of course, you want to put your best foot forward, but also, I want to see is this someone I want to choose? Is this someone I would like to date?
Oh, yeah. Maybe you're so focused on that you're not actually present. 'Cause,
Exactly.
like, a lot of times people could be, like, in a conversation and they're thinking about the next thing the person is gonna say instead of actually hearing what they actually said. And if you're in your own
Exactly.
mind with this Cinderella thing, maybe you're not even
Hmm.
picking up cues, like, you're not picking up the body language, you're not picking up what he's saying, how his face is looking, how he responded to something you said. You're so in your head, you're not actually observing a lot of key things you're probably missing.
Right, right. And going back to what you were saying about a vibe, it's not a very sexy vibe, right? Because think about it, when you're just trying to impress someone, you're kind of tense, you're lean forward, you're like, right? You're really focused. You are not present at all. You're really focused on, I want this person to like me. And we've all experienced when someone desperately wants us to like them, what do? It's kind of like, oh,
Yeah,
right?
like, it's not
It is,
attractive. It
it is
doesn't really pull you in, you
it does
know?
not. No, it'll push you away if anything, right? So yeah, I think that that becomes really important is that when you show up on a date or even early on in a chat, just to have that presence, to be relaxed, to be in your body. And I get it. We get nervous. So you might just have to like lean back and just really notice your seat in the chair, leaning against or touching, maybe the rim of your wine glass or coffee cup or something, right? And just really getting back in your body, taking a breath, and then coming back into the conversation and not worrying so much about how can I get this person to like me as much as being discerning yourself of, is this a good match? Is this someone I want to get to know further? I realized that I did that all the time with like job interviews. I
Yeah.
would, of course, I wanted them to, I wanted to put my best foot forward and was hoping that they would, like me. But I was also always deciding, do I actually want to work here? And I realized I really wasn't doing that with dating. And it was very interesting because once I then switched my vibe and suddenly I actually got a lot more dates. So even just at a chat level, when you're just chatting online, there is something about your vibe that
Yeah.
can
Your
bring someone
frequency.
in or repel someone, even at that level. And, there's some physics that explain that. But for people who don't understand that, it might sound like really kind of out there, but it is true. And I guarantee you that when you are in a happier place, a higher vibe place, and you go online, you're going to see more people that you'll be interested in. You're going to match with more people. But when you go on and you're down and you're frustrated and you're like, I just got to find someone now, that
Yeah.
vibe will attract to you, and your brain, your reticular activating system will only see people you are not interested in going out with. And also that vibe will repel people from wanting to chat with you.
It's like the desperation trap, because I think like if you use the tapping to kind of not be anxious, not be so keyed up, right? If you're more relaxed, if
Yep.
you're more at peace,
Yep.
and I think it's like once you get to a place where you're like you're not so like I have to win. Sometimes like it's not about winning that moment or winning that conversation or everything you got to win. Sometimes you got to let things be. You got to live in the present moment. And
Yeah.
as a musician, the way we think about it is like there are no bad notes, right?
Yeah.
If I get so anxious about the next note I play, I'm not actually paying attention to where I am,
Right.
right? If I actually let it go and trust myself, and I've been playing 25 years, I know how to play. So I don't care if I actually hit a note that's unexpected. Well, I'm a musician, I know what to do, and the other guys know what to do. Don't worry about it. So if you come into it like that, then
Yeah.
something really beautiful gets generated. You create something really beautiful rather than something that's it's discordant, it's falling apart. Like you start to have like that connection, that harmonious connection when you're playing with like four people. There's four different people you're playing with, and you're connected, and it's
Yeah.
nonverbal, and it works because you
Yeah.
kind of let it go. And you can do that one-on-one with people if you kinda think about it that way.
Right. And the hard part is the letting it go, right? Especially if you're feeling, "Oh my god, I'm gonna grow old alone," or "I'm never gonna find my person," or any worry, anxious thoughts. If you're having that going on, you're never going to be able to be in that flow state and be relaxed. I had a client who recently, so I have an 8-week online course that I take women through that really goes deep into a lot of this stuff, into reprogramming your mind. We use EFT and other tools. And I had a client who, said to me a couple weeks later, she said, you were totally right about just going out there and living your life. And that's when things will start to happen because I was volunteering at this organization that I loved. I wasn't even remotely thinking about meeting a guy, but I was loving it. And she's like, and it lit me up. Like I felt it. Like I felt super excited to be there every day. I felt like I was making a difference. I was really excited. And then out of nowhere, this guy that I didn't even realize was single gives me his phone number. And she was like, "Oh, okay." So I think that that's the other thing, is that when we are in that high vibe place, we kind of have a glow about us that makes
Yeah,
us magnetic. It makes it draws to you the potential partner that, to your point, if you're out there doing something that is your passion and you meet someone at that, that's probably a good sign that that might be a really good person for you.
Yeah, it's kind of how I met my wife. He's like, she's a playwright and I'm a musician, and we were just met at like Mount Holyoke. She went there, and I
Oh,
went to like a Halloween party, and I wasn't really trying to meet anybody. I was just finally, I had just gotten over cancer, and I was going and being more outward than I'd ever been, and I wasn't really trying to find anybody. I said, well, I'll just go to this thing and see what's going on. And I heard there was some like artists there, and I'm a musician. I wanted to work on soundtrack work for this play, and my wife's a playwright, so I kind of came into the situation where like, hey, maybe we could work together on this thing, and we clicked. And it wasn't about trying to date; we were actually working on an art project,
yeah.
and that's how and we've been married like 25 years, and
Yeah.
it's just, and it was when I stopped trying to actively look, it just happened,
Yes.
and it was in a place that was like a very kind of creative zone, and that's
Right.
what happened.
Oh, here's what I will say, and I do, and my book is very personal, and I write my very personal struggles that I had dating. So that was one of my struggles because I knew that to be true, right? I'm into law of attraction too. I know that when you release attachment to the outcome, that is when the thing will come to you, right? That's typically what it is. And people kept saying you'll meet your person when you stop looking, and I struggled with that for a long time because I thought, how do I stop looking though? Because I want to stop looking, but I'm lonely and I'm worried that I am never going to meet someone. I mean, I had all the things that everybody, who's single has gone through, right? And then I started tapping on those feelings and clearing those feelings. And so that's one message of hope I always like to try to give listeners is if you're frustrated because people keep telling you, well, you'll meet someone when you stop looking, or you're frustrated because people keep telling you, well, you just have to love yourself more and then love will find you. I mean, these things are true, but
Yeah.
they're not easy to do. You can't just switch your mind very easily to that. But with the tapping, it actually does become easy to do. And that's my message. And that's why I have the tapping script in my book, because, one of them is actually stop, help me stop searching for the one. And then when you stop searching for the one and you just relax and go about living your life, a lot of times that is when they show up.
Well, what you did is like you lessened the anxiety or like the fight or flight, thing going on because you're tapping, and so you're kind of reducing that fear, you're reducing all that anxiety. So
Yep.
then you get to a more balanced state in your life where you're not so like out of phase, because like if you're kind of like I always talk about things being like discordant or you're like in terms of frequencies because I'm a musician, and like if you're out of sync when things don't work. So if you finally start to kind of mellow out and actually find your sweet spot, then things start to happen.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And it's hard to mellow out through thought alone. Because here's the problem in our society. We're trying to change thought with thought. And you can't, because the thought comes out of an emotion. You have to change the emotion to be able to change the thought. Now, we can use thoughts to try to get into the emotion, but because the emotion lives at that body level, that's where it will work to a certain extent. Like affirmations and stuff, they will work, but they take a long time, or they can feel really arduous because if you're saying an affirmation over and over, and like let's say you're saying I know what is meant for me will never find me. This is a very helpful affirmation, right? What is meant for me will never find me. Then okay, I just have faith and I can relax and wait. But if your subconscious is like, heck no, you can't wait, if you wait you'll be alone forever. If you have all this doubt at a subconscious level, then the
Yeah.
affirmation isn't going to work. But if you tap on the doubt voice, clear that away, then suddenly you just believe it. You do believe, yeah, what is meant for me will never miss me. That is actually true. Because once the doubt is clear to it, then it just feels true.
It's always so interesting, like, if you run into people where they feel like if you feel like they feel guilty about being too happy. So they
Yeah.
never feel they should be happy because like, "Well, I don't have a right to be happy because people are starving, so
Yep.
I shouldn't be happy." So they always find a reason why they can't be happy because, well, somebody else isn't happy or this isn't it. So it's like, well, it's not selfish to finally feel good. Like, what's
Right.
wrong? You think, like, if you feel good, then you're probably gonna be more productive and you can help other people
Right.
if you think about it that
Exactly.
way. But if you feel like just being in the down doesn't mean that you're helping anybody by being in the down.
Right. And so you can take a person like that and you can tell them that. You can say, "Hey, no, you should let yourself feel happy, because these all these good things will come." But if that guilt is really deeply programmed in them from like early childhood, chances are they can hear that, but they can't actually make the change. But if you start tapping on those early childhood memories of times that, maybe your parents accidentally made you feel guilty or maybe intentionally made you feel guilty or whatever, but those early experiences with guilt, if you tap on those and neutralize those, then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to feel guilty. It is okay for me to feel happy, even though there are people suffering in the world. So
Yeah, I
that,
think it's a hard place to get to without, previously in Western medicine, you might go get meds, or
right.
you might go do this, you might do that. And it like tap and it's just sometimes things are in front of you and you don't accept it until you get to a point where, well, maybe you tried everything and maybe you should try something else.
Right.
So I wonder, like, when you run into people, like how do they find you? They've like kind of run through the gamut, and then they find like, well, maybe I should try this.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I think I kind of get all types because I definitely get people who come to me who know about tapping and they are already down with it and they know it works. And then I get some people, I just had a client today actually who was a new client, referred to me from another client. And when I started, I said, "Okay, so what do you know about EFT?" She said, "Nothing. I know nothing about it." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, so that's sort of unusual. But I was like, all right, well, you know what? Luckily for you, you're going to see by the end of this session that it does work. So the proof is in the pudding. I remember when I was first trained and I asked some other people I knew who were already trained, I said, well, how do you convince people to do this? And they were like, they do it and they see it works in minutes and then they're convinced. And I was like, oh,
Just gotta
okay.
do it.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I'll all the time tap with people like, let's say we're on an airplane and there's turbulence, people get nervous. I'll say, oh, here, let me just show you this. Just start tapping here, start tapping here. You don't act people, if you look this up on YouTube, you say emotional freedom technique for anxiety or whatever, you will find lots and lots of videos of how to do it. It is made to be a self-help tool. And I always say it's like brushing your teeth versus going to the dentist, right? So use it every day, use it on the regular, use it to address those everyday stresses like you would brush your teeth. And then if there's like a big thing, a big pattern that you can't shift or a big trauma from your past, go to a practitioner because it's just a safer, sort of more gentler way of
Mhm.
doing it when you're sort of led, right? So that's my advice with that. But all the time, I just show people how to do it and they're shocked and amazed. We're in the middle of turbulence. We start tapping a couple minutes in, they're like, well, this is weird. I don't feel nervous anymore. I'm like, I know, right? I mean, it is weird. It astonishes me every day. I'm constantly shocked that people are just like, wait, where'd that feeling go? It's gone. So, people, if you look it up, you're going to see the practitioner leading people through with saying things. But just know that the only reason that we use the words we use as practitioners is to try to get you to feel the feelings and to be in the emotion, not to be sort of locked away or dissociated away, because then tapping doesn't work. So if you're intellectualizing your problem and you're tapping on it, it's probably not going to work. But if you're feeling the heartache or you're feeling the nervous butterflies or you're feeling the tightness
Mhm.
in your head, then it's going to work. So you don't actually have to say anything when you're already in the feeling state. So
Oh,
like
okay.
I always tell people, if you're stuck in traffic, right? There is nothing you can do about that, right? Like, especially, and then you're like worried, am I going to be late? So you're dumping your system with all this stress hormone because you're freaking out, and there's literally nothing you can do. You're trapped, right? Between other cars. But what you can do is you can tap and you can calm your own nervous system, and then you are just relaxed. And a lot of times you'll come up with a new neural neural pathway. So you'll have this new thought of like, or actually, I could get off at the next exit and take this cut through I know about. But you couldn't think that when you were in that panic.
Yeah, panic, you get that fight or flight. But there's so many things that trigger the fight or flight in the modern world.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many things that you could be looking at something on your phone, and then
Right.
it triggers you. So
Absolutely.
the wolf is still real.
Right.
It's just this kind of virtual wolf that like is
Right.
coming through all these inputs, there's all this noise. It
Right.
seems like your tapping can allow you to learn how to deal with these triggers that are coming from the modern world and figure out how to be more effective and handling it.
Right, exactly. So another trick I tell people is if you're talking on the phone to someone and you're like venting about your problems, so you're already in the emotion of it, right? Because we know how we get when we talk about stuff. We're like, and then this happened, right? And you're like leaning forward, and you're tense, and you're in fight or flight. You are in fight or flight. So that is a great time to just start tapping while you're on the
Mhm.
phone. Just start doing the
Alright.
tapping. And that's a great time. Or in the shower, a lot of times we're in the shower, we're ruminating about our problems, right? We're getting worried for the day. That's a great time. So, anytime that your mind would naturally be kind of chewing on your problems is a really good time to just go ahead and do the tapping because you will clear out things that have been bothering you. And sometimes they can be really big things. I know I used to have a debilitating fear of heights, like couldn't go on a top bunk of a bunk bed kind of fear of
Mhm.
heights. And my kids were really into roller coasters when they were younger and always wanted me to do it. I was like, no way, no way,
You
no way.
wanna do that.
Then I learned
Uh,
tapping and we were waiting in line and it was one of those really long lines, like an hour long. And so I just tapped the whole time because I've kind of gotten over the thing. I don't care if people think it's weird that I'm tapping on my face. and,
mhm.
and you can also tap on the side of your hand and that can be kind of subtle. So I tapped pretty much the whole time we were waiting. And then when we got up to the front of the line and they thought I was going to step to the side like I normally do, I said,
Try
I'll try it.
it.
And I went on, and it's really interesting because when you really get to the root of something, it's so weird because it's almost like this out of body experience. You will do this thing that you'll surprise yourself. You'll say, "What?
Mhm. I
Am
can do that.
I do that now?" So yeah, now I can go on roller coasters.
Wow. I wish I get my wife and my daughter to do that because they won't do it.
Yeah, see?
I'm the
Yeah,
only
it's
one. I have to bring some other people with me because nobody else wants to go.
well, get them tapping. I have cleared many, many, many people's phobias, and think especially around things like that. But fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of flying,
Mhm.
really good on phobias, and it works very fast on phobias.
There's one thing we like to ask guests, just as a question we ask all of our guests is, what are 3 things about yourself that maybe people wouldn't expect?
Ooh, what are three things about me that people wouldn't expect? Well, I would say that people tend to think that I'm very athletic, that I'm very competitive, all those kind of things. And I am not. I always say if there was a zombie apocalypse, like I'd be like, just take me. I'm not crawling over any dead bodies. Like I'm good. I'm good. So that's one thing that I think often surprises people. Um, let's see, what else would surprise people about me? I think that the fact that I have a good memory and I've learned all this neuroscience and stuff now, but actually as a kid, I was held back. I was put in summer school one year. And I really struggled academically until my family moved, actually. And I think because the one school system kind of overlapped things for the other school system, I caught up. And luckily, somehow I never really knew. I thought that I was at camp when I was at summer school. So it didn't impact my self-esteem or I didn't create limiting beliefs around I'm not smart or things like that that a lot of people do, right? So I was
Mhm.
really lucky in that way. And so anyway, people always seem to be very surprised by that. And then I guess the last thing is just that I think I am blessed to look a little bit younger than I am. So people tend to be pretty surprised when I say I'm in my 50s and I have a son in college and things like that. So that's my good genes, I
That's
guess.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, we like to give a little insight to our audience about our guests that maybe they wouldn't normally get. And I think
Yeah.
it's good to kind of give the full picture of like who you are. It helps people kind of understand what you're doing.
Right.
Again, one thing like we talked about your website, inspiredlifetapping.com at the beginning, but we didn't say like if people click on that, what happens? How do they interact with you there?
Yeah, so you can go there, and anyone who's interested in talking with me about my program can certainly book an appointment on my calendar right from there. I do also have a how to tap link. So if you are just interested in learning more about tapping, you want to go there, you can check that out. My handles on all the social medias also Inspired Life Tapping on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all the things. So you can find me there and find other videos and tutorials of how to use tapping and how to start incorporating it in your life. I do feel like it's a little bit of a life's mission of mine because I feel with all the stuff going on in the world, the more peaceful we are in ourselves, the more peaceful the world will be, right? Because if
Yeah,
everyone was at
start with
peace, we
everybody.
would have world peace, right? So, yeah, so
Yeah,
here's a great tool that will really change your life. I literally my kids still joke that I was kind of like a yelly parent until I got trained in this.
yeah.
And there was a point early on where if I started yelling, they'd be like, "Mom, I think you should tap now." And so and so I just noticed that I became way more regulated over time. I became way more present. I really got to enjoy my kids at a whole new level once I started incorporating this in my life. And I've really gotten to just enjoy my life at a whole new level. And by the way, I didn't even say this, I just realized, but I wouldn't have even written the book if it wasn't for tapping because
Mm.
I had fear of being seen, fear of being too personal, putting my story out there, all the things.
Vulnerability, yeah, vulnerability is hard, because the first thing is if you're an author, an artist, like you put that out there, and then you're always kind of like, is that good enough? Do I have a right to be an author? Should I even be putting it out there?
Right.
And once you can get rid of that anxiety, it's like every artist, you get a little anxiety once you're into it. But even when you step on stage, sometimes I've been around artists like you see them doing it, but like they're so anxious until they step on the stage. They probably need tapping because even though
Yeah,
they can do it, they
right,
still have this anxiety problem until they actually get on the stage.
right,
And you would think they seem like a different person, but up
right.
to the point where all day they were freaking out. And I'm
Yeah,
like, and when they get on stage, nobody sees that they were freaking out because they seem like they're natural. But
right.
it's all the moments before you
So
get there. And if you're that kind of person, then it seems like tapping would really help you, whether you're doing a speech or
oh,
you're giving a
yeah.
presentation or you're doing something for your job.
Yep.
Everybody can have the same kind of problem, right?
I've used it a lot. I've helped a lot of people with performance anxiety for sure. My kids even were in theater when they were little, and I would do it with the group before they would go on stage and stuff. Yeah, it's really amazing for performance anxiety for sure. So,
That would
yeah.
really help a lot of the creators in my audience. They should check it out and contact you there, and it will help them in a different way than maybe they've been doing other things that maybe are not that great for themselves. And this
Right,
gives people another option, which I always want to give people by talking to folks like yourself. It gives people different options that maybe they didn't even think it was something else they could do. And
right.
that's always important to me to try to voice that and have people who actually know about things talk about it. So thank you again for being a guest on the Family Like That Goes podcast. It's been great.
Thanks
We
for
always
having me.
it always ends up being going along faster than we ever think. But we pretty much on the hour mark now. But I want to thank you again for being a guest. And we were live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and we'll be on all the platforms that podcast can be listened to or watched by tomorrow. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks. It was fun.
Have a good night.